Hello, hello. I'm Casey,
And I'm Fallon.
and this is
Render the Darkness.
One of us got the pajama memo, and one of us did not.
Guess which one didn't?
Yeah.
Guess who didn't tell that person?
Well, one of us was ready to have a party, and the other one just looks cold.
I am cold.
So, today's
cold. Sorry.
Today's episode, we're going to be talking about history's cruel path of torture and punishment. The fact of the episode today is that penicillin was originally called mold juice. So thank God they changed that.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Yeah. I much prefer penicillin because I don't know off the top of my head what that means, and it's something I would have to look up, and naivety is bliss.
Yeah, but if you look it up, though, I'm pretty sure it would still...
Doesn't refer to it as mold juice. I did look it up.
Well, I would hope it didn't.
It just tells you it comes from a family of like penicillium or something like that. I don't know. I did look it up though. But anyway, so today we're going to travel back to a time when the way a person should be punished for their crimes wasn't quite as humanely established in most areas of the world as it is now.
Okay.
We're going to be talking a lot about medieval and ancient forms of torture and torture devices, as well as some that were still being used not that long ago. And I actually think I touch on one. In fact, I know I touch on one that's still being used to this day.
Okay, wow.
So just to mention a few of the most common forms of punishment that probably come to people's minds when they think of these kinds of things, you have the guillotine.
Yeah.
Flogging.
Yes.
Was a common one. Getting your head chopped off with an axe was a pretty common one. Think about the older days. Stoning comes to mind. This form of death goes all the way back to biblical times.
Yeah, they used that a lot back in the day.
They did. What about burning someone alive?
Oh, yeah.
That was pretty common. You heard about this a lot when referring to witches or witch trials.
Yeah.
Another one that's often talked about or seen is the hanging.
Yep.
That was used for a long time all over the world. I don't think I've ever seen a Western movie where somebody didn't get hung at least once.
That is true. Yeah, there's usually at least one hanging in every Western. Yeah.
But I'm not going to be focusing on these kind of more common things that people think about when thinking about that kind of stuff. But I can say that the things I will be focusing on in today's episode, I would imagine, or I feel like I can pretty bravely say, would probably make someone in a situation of persecution beg for any one of these types of punishment.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a difference between execution and torture. The methods we're about to get into, they somehow merge these two for some truly horrendous results.
Okay.
That being said, please know ahead of time that there was just no way to talk about this topic without going into some pretty gruesome and explicit details. This entire episode is a content warning.
Wow.
It's full of adult content and human harm. If that's something that is potentially triggering or sensitive for you, please skip this episode and tune back into the next one. We will not be offended at all.
Nope.
Completely understand.
Will not blame you.
So let's jump right in. These methods come from all over the world at different time frames throughout history. I'll do my best to include when they were most popularly used, what time era they were used in, and also where they were most commonly used, as well as I will add whether or not these torture methods or devices are believed to be fact or fiction.
Okay.
The first one we're going to talk about is rat torture.
Okay, this already didn't sound good.
So what is said to happen is that the executioners would take a bucket of starving or diseased rats. They would conceal the rats on the bare skin of the person, usually their chest or stomach, using the bucket. They would apply heat to the outside of the bucket, which would then cause the rats to become increasingly agitated, and they would then chew through the person's skin and organs in an effort to find safety.
Ooh,
thereby killing the
ouch.
person in a very agonizing way.
That's terrible.
I also thought that was terrible. The validity of this exact method is questioned by some due to lack of any evidence that this specific thing happened, but there is definitely proof of this method being used in the 16th century by one Diederik Saunier during the Dutch revolt against the Spanish, or at least to the recounts written by John Lothrop Motley in The Rise of the Dutch Republic.
Okay.
It's believed that Saunier would use the rats as a form of torture on prisoners in a very similar way as the one I just mentioned, but he would actually cut the stomachs of the prisoners open, exposing their organs. Then he would take a bowl or dump a bowl of rats into their stomachs, applying heat, driving the rats mad, who would then frantically burrow in the intestines, killing the prisoner.
Okay. Ouch. God, that just makes my stomach hurt. Ugh.
Yeah, it's pretty, I could not imagine. So these practices were documented all over the world. Although this particular form of torture did eventually get abolished, there's records of rats being used as like psychological warfare all the way up to 1985.
Wow.
If you ask me, they still use rats as a way to psychologically torture people to this day. I've seen Fear Factor.
Oh yeah.
Not sponsored,
no.
but I've seen it.
They do spiders too, like
They
with
do.
the box.
Or like making them lay down in a box and then like dumping the rats on. Ugh. Okay, next we're going to talk about the pear of anguish.
This one I have not heard of.
Well, I know I gave a warning at the beginning of the episode, but I'm going to give another one here. This is graphic and could be disturbing to some.
Okay.
This device was said to be used in Europe in the 17th century. The device is shaped similarly to a pear.
Okay.
On the top, it has a large head. There was a stem that had a screw attached to it that was used to control the opening and closing of the claws at the top. I guess a better way to describe it, it was kind of like a metal or iron flower that's not in bloom, but with the turn of a screw, it could be in bloom.
Oh.
So,
again,
picture that.
Doesn't sound good.
When the screw is turned just like a blooming flower, as I just said, the claws or petals would begin to open. Supposedly, what would happen was, when the pear was closed, it would be inserted into different orifices of the body, like the rectum or the vagina.
Oh, gosh.
After insertion, the executioner or torturer would then begin to slowly open the claws. The pressure would begin to cause agonizing pain, as the pear's intended purpose, it wasn't actually to kill anybody, just to cause really agonizing, torturous pain that would trigger the person to confess or talk.
Oh.
So this was said to be an interrogation device.
Golly, that, again, making hurt. God.
When it comes to proof as to whether or not this device actually existed, the consensus says yes, it did. But it was also noted that it wasn't always used on the vagina or anus. It was also used for the mouth.
What?
If someone wanted the opposite effect, they could put the pear in the person's mouth and open the claws, stretching the person's mouth, preventing them from yelling or talking.
Oh, wow.
So instead of interrogating it and using it as a confession tool, they would use it to keep someone quiet.
Like a gag.
Like a very painful gag. It was also thought that they could even lock the claws in place with an actual key. And in order to be freed from the contraption, the victim would often agree to a proposed bribe in order to get the key to be freed.
I could see that.
And that is why the pear of anguish is also sometimes referred to as the choke pear.
All right. That was...
I couldn't find definitively whether this one was true or not, but I do know that there are a lot of different models of it in many different museums throughout the whole world. And I also know that, true or not, the idea that this could have been a thing is a pretty terrifying thought.
Yeah, yeah.
The next topic of disturbance is the breaking wheel.
Sorry.
It's fine. You ever heard of the breaking wheel?
I mean, it kind of sounds familiar, but there's nothing going on up here, so.
Have you ever heard of the breaking wheel? I'm sure some of you have.
Mm.
It was also referred to as St. Catherine's Wheel. Real quick, the reason it was called that is because St. Catherine was tied to the wheel to be persecuted for her refusal to denounce her Christianity, and the wheel broke in half.
Oh.
Furious at the divine intervention believed to have just taken place from her executioner, Emperor Maxentius, he decapitated her.
Oh.
So, this form of torture was used in public executions. Well, people got to watch this happen.
Oh.
What they would do was, for anyone convicted of murder, rape, being a traitor, thievery, that person would be sentenced to execution by the wheel. The process of this execution was usually broken down into separate days and parts with a specific level of pain and torture in mind. And that level was the maximum level of pain possible.
Oh.
Typically, on the first day, the wheel would be dropped directly on the person, breaking their bones. Now, I should say that, okay, the wheel, as I think I forgot to put this in there, but the wheel, although usually the wheel itself was wood, it was also usually lined with like an iron metal.
How would that not kill them?
Well, if you drop it in the right spot, it would
God.
break a bone or sever something, but not necessarily kill you,
I figured
depending
that,
on
like,
where you dropped it.
Drop the wheel. Done.
So the next day, the person would be tied to the wheel, and their bones would continue to be systematically broken. The condemned would be left to suffer for hours, sometimes days, with their broken appendages just dangling or entangled in the spokes of the wheel.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that one was actually very much true. That really did exist, and they really did do that. The next one we're going to talk about is the Judas chair, sometimes referred to as the Judas cradle. This device comes straight out of medieval times.
All right.
The top of the device was shaped like a pyramid and was more often than not made out of metal. Sometimes wood, but mostly metal.
Okay.
The person would be positioned above the tip of the chair and slowly lowered down until the tip began to penetrate the person, whether it be through the anus or vagina.
Oh my gosh, why? Ugh.
As this happened, especially depending on what part of the body was being penetrated, it would usually cause internal injuries that typically led to death. The device was said to mostly be used to get confessions out of people, but if some simply wouldn't comply, they would just be subjected to this truly horrendous form of torture.
Oh gosh.
Not only is there a ton of evidence from the Middle Ages that this device existed, there's also evidence that it was used quite often.
Yeah.
This was one of their more common go-tos.
Yeah.
For execution and punishment. Next, we're going to talk about the rack.
The rack, okay.
From what I read, this originated out of Europe, said to be created in 1447 by Constable John Exeter, and was originally used in the Tower of London, but its popularity quickly spread and the device began to be used all over. With this device, they would take a wooden frame, sometimes metal, and suspend it above the ground. Then they would attach a crank of some sort to the ends of the frames. They would then tie the limbs of the person to the rollers and start cranking, stretching the person's arms and legs until they either became disjointed or sometimes even ripped completely off.
Okay.
This was said to be sometimes implemented in other ways, but was again typically intended to trigger a confession from its victims.
Yeah, see, I've heard of that one before. I don't know if I remember it being called the rack, but I remember the method itself.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I read too that sometimes they would light fire underneath it just for an added extra bit of torture, I guess, pain.
I mean, the stretching of the arms and the tearing of the arms and stuff wasn't enough. Just add some fire.
Add some fire.
All right.
Next, we're going to talk about coffin torture.
Ooh.
This form of torture, again coming out of the Middle Ages, was when a person would be placed in a wooden box, a very made-to-size wooden box.
Like?
Meaning it was literally only big enough for the intended victim to be placed in the box. It did not allow for any wiggle room whatsoever.
This is already making it hard for me to breathe.
So then the person was usually just left in there for days at a time. Think that's not medieval enough? These coffins were often placed right in the middle of town square, so the town folks could get their fair shot at a chance to come by and abuse the person however much and however long they chose.
So they just open the lid?
They just open the lid and do whatever they wanted to do to that person and move on about their merry way.
Wow, that's just messed up on so many levels.
The first thing that came to mind for me was if somebody was convicted of, let's say, murder, especially of, like, God forbid, a child.
Yeah.
I'm sure the town folks were only thinking about vengeance at that point. So being given the opportunity to get that directly, I can only imagine some of the things that were probably done to the people in these boxes.
Yeah, I can think of one thing that was probably done right off the bat if it had to involve a child.
I also could think of that exact same thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes the coffins would be left in such harsh weather conditions the victim would die. Sometimes the victim was noted to have been released.
Okay.
But usually not.
Oh.
And yes, this form of punishment was very much real.
Okay, that's just... God.
Yeah. Next is the thumb screw.
Oh, I don't like the sound of that. I could be wrong of where it's going, but okay.
Another tool created with the set intentions of getting a confession out of its victims was dated back to the 1600s in France. It literally looks like a clamp or a vice. What they would do was put the person's thumb between a metal plate and a screw. They would then tighten the screw, sometimes until the thumb was completely mangled. Even though this method was said to have originated in France, it was used all over Europe. I read that sometimes it was even used as a sort of like a precursor to the rack.
Ooh.
So they would do the thumb screw before putting them on the rack.
Lovely.
So, yeah.
I'm just sitting here wiggling my thumbs.
I'm like that with like anything involving eyes. Like in movies when people are doing things close to an eyeball or fingernails. Like if they're pulling a fingernail back or off.
Or they like take a pin and they like
or drive it underneath. Anyway.
And my thing is ears and anything to do with the mouth.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. All right, next we're going to talk about the Iron Maiden.
This one I have heard of.
I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard of this one. It was pretty common. Most people think this device came out of the Middle Ages, but actually the first known record of it being used wasn't until the 17th century.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was said to be a metal or iron human-sized and sometimes human-shaped box that was equipped with sharp spikes. The idea was that these spikes would be just long enough to puncture the person, but to not actually kill them immediately. They would slowly bleed out over time.
Okay.
The first account of this device that I could find was by someone named Nabis, who was a Spartan tyrant in 200 BC. If I said that wrong, I'm really sorry.
All right. Spartan.
This is Sparta. Anyway, so the brazen bull.
This one sounds familiar.
It should. You've probably seen it in movies.
Okay.
This device or idea was said to come from the ancient Greeks and Romans. This was a giant statue, typically made of brass or bronze, in the shape of a bull. The victims were thrown inside the statue and a fire would be lit underneath, effectively cooking the victims slowly.
Ew.
The nostrils were designed in a way that would allow the smoke and the screams of the victims to billow out. So the smoke would billow out and it would create the image of an angry bull, and the screams would mimic the low sounds that a bull might make.
Wow, they really put some thought into that, didn't they?
They did. The original reason for its creation was to end the practice of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. This dates back to being used as far back as the early 300s. But like most of these, it didn't take long for this use of this method to expand and begin to be used all over.
Okay.
Next, we're going to talk about sawing.
Just sawing?
Sawing.
Okay.
This form of gruesome punishment was practiced all over the world at one point, especially in Europe and Asia, in medieval times especially. But the first known record of execution of sawing actually comes out of ancient Persia. Apparently, Darius II's wife commanded this method be used on one of her rivals. Ooh. In this form of execution, the victim is hung upside down and then sawed in half vertically, starting with the crotch region.
Oh my gosh.
They did it this way because the victim would stay conscious for longer. So this form of execution was used well into the 19th century and was typically used on people accused of witchcraft, adultery, murder, blasphemy, or theft.
I'm going to interrupt you here. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But because you just said that,
mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people, if you're into into horror movies and stuff, have you seen Terrifier?
Which one?
The first one.
Yes.
That scene.
Yeah. See, I thought about, and I know it wasn't a Saw, but I thought about that Tomahawk movie that we just watched with Patrick Swayze.
What?
Remember where they go out, the wife gets kidnapped, and then they all go out to Luke Wilson and not Patrick Swayze, Kurt Russell.
Yeah, Kurt Russell. Yes.
Kurt Russell.
Yes.
Bone Tomahawk or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Also not sponsored. Sorry.
No, but
I thought about that scene in that movie when I was.
Yeah, that's the first thing I could
think
of because, like I said, I just seen that.
And I did read too, and I might say this wrong because I didn't include it in my little script here, but I did see too where this was also used in China, and somehow the Chinese managed to, and I didn't really understand the concept of how this worked, but what they would do, from what I read, is they would put 2 stakes in the ground, and they would hang the person in between the stakes, and for some reason that would somehow slow the blood flow. I don't know how that worked, but it was said to, however they did it or however it worked, it was said to actually make this take longer and keep the person awake for longer. Like they could be awake all the way until they got to their middle chest.
Oh my gosh.
With whatever thing they did that made this.
I'm surprised they wouldn't go into shock though and just pass out. I
don't know. Like I said, I tried to investigate that a little further, but I didn't really understand the science behind why that worked or how it worked, but I just wanted to throw it out there because I thought it was interesting. If anybody knows more about that or why that worked, please feel free to reach out and comment and let us know.
I just did a Jim Carrey face. Like, it was better the first time I did it, but I was like, oh, I think it was Jim Carrey.
Hilarious.
Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
You're fine. Next, we're going to talk about the heretic's forks.
Okay.
This is another tool used for pain and during the Middle Ages. I read, though, that this one was mostly used during the Spanish Inquisition and primarily used on those to be witches or heretics, hence the name.
Okay.
This device was quite simple. What they would do was they would take a collar and attach 2 forks to the top of the collar that were meant to dig into the underside of the chin. And then 2 more forks were placed on the opposite end of the collar, placing the forks at the victim's chest or sternum. The idea was that if the person tried to move their head or talk, the forks would in turn penetrate the skin and cause agonizing pain. Although this particular device wouldn't kill the person, it would cause enough excruciating pain that the person would eventually confess to whatever they had to in order to get released from the device, which oftentimes, unfortunately, resulted in them being burned at the stake.
Oh, gosh.
So,
that is just...
This
whole episode's making me hurt.
This device was very much true. They really did do this. Okay, so next we're going to talk about, and I hope I say this right. No pun intended here. I was getting very tongue-tied trying to say this one.
Okay.
The next one we're going to talk about is the tongue terror.
Oh, man, I just said my...
Again, coming at you out of Europe in the medieval ages.
Wow, man, Europe.
I would not want to piss anybody off in Europe. I mean, now... I wouldn't want to piss anybody off anywhere now, but especially back in the Middle Ages, no. I would be minding my P's and Q's and staying in my little house and head down,
mouth shut.
Shut. Anyway, this contraption used on people accused of blasphemy or heresy. This tool literally... And I know I'm saying literally a lot, but I couldn't believe how many of these things look so much like the common everyday things that we use today.
Okay.
So this, which I want to say, it really made me wonder if some of our tools we use now once started out as something devised with the intent to harm other people. And we just found like nicer uses for them over the time.
Like, hey, this could be used for a salad, too.
I know. Like, think about how many weapons does the common Joe have laying around their house and they just don't know that they were originally meant to be weapons?
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, back to the terror. It literally looked like a pair of garden shears.
Oh.
Except instead of being designed to cut like garden shears, they were designed with a mechanism that would allow them to be clamped to the accused person's tongue and ripped out.
You just had to say that so quick, didn't you?
I did. Rip it out like a Band-Aid. No, that's rip it off. This could be done however fast or slow the executioner wanted. The ripping out of the tongue wasn't always the result. Sometimes they just twisted and turned until it couldn't be contorted any further to get a confession out of the person. There are records of this device being very much true.
Okay.
What movie was that? Where they pulled the tongue out like really, really far and then let it go. Was it Beetlejuice?
No, wait.
And they let the tongue go, and he, like, grabs his mouth.
Was it Beetlejuice?
I don't know. Anyway, that's scene, even though I can't place who it was or what movie it was in. That's what came to my mind when I was
now it's going to bother me.
About this
I mean,
one.
I think he did do that at some point in time.
Did he do that to Alec Baldwin? Like, the tongue got pulled out?
Yeah, I remember him doing this.
Yeah, when they were...
I don't remember...
Because it was, like, right before they did their faces, right?
I don't remember.
Okay, we're getting so sidetracked in this.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I'm old. I don't remember things.
I don't have an excuse. I just don't remember things. The next one we're going to talk about is the scavenger's daughter.
Okay.
This one is often referred to as Skevington's Guise, named after its creator, Sir Leonard Skevington, in the, you guessed it, 16th century England.
Okay.
This was a metal, full-body length A-frame device that consisted of a hoop or ring where the head would go, and the hands and feet also had rings for holding them into position. Usually this thing wasn't fit to size, so And I read in some resources that the rings would sometimes have little spikes embedded in them to intensify the level of pain the victim would experience.
Okay.
The scaffolding of the frame had the capability of folding in half, thereby folding the victim in half, causing the blood to run from the nose to the ears.
Oh.
They could also compress the hands and feet as they chose, causing the appendages to contort.
Ow.
Some referred to this method as a reverse of the rack. If you remember, the rack tortured its victims by stretching their body parts and dislocating them and often separating them. The scavenger's daughter was designed to contort and compress its victims' bodies.
Okay.
This was also...
There
were records that this was also true. What?
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, is there a reason why it's called the scavenger's daughter?
There is a reason that it's called that, because I believe, if I read the story correctly, it was originally used on a scavenger's daughter.
Oh.
I could be wrong about that.
That makes sense.
I
like the first person it was used on was a
correct, like who it was made for or made to punish.
That makes sense.
But again, it was, like I said earlier, it was created by Leonard Skevington, which at the time I know he created it. I think she may have been the first victim of it, but I don't think that's why he created it.
Right.
I think he created it just as a tool of torture for prisoners or anybody trying to invade.
Okay.
So that was my long-winded way of saying no, I don't know why it's called that. No idea. Okay, so we're going to move to the armchair of inquiries.
Okay.
Also called the iron chair because it was believed to be made of iron. This was brought to the world by Europe in the Middle Ages. Y'all are some sick bastards.
Yeah,
I mean, not now, but then. Y'all were some sick bastards. Anyway, this chair contained hundreds and thousands of spikes all over it. There was also sometimes a hole in the middle of the seat so fire could be used to really amp up the level of torture this chair could bring.
So it was spiky all over your body, but your booty got the fire.
Sometimes.
Ah. Okay.
The victims was said to be strapped to the chair, and the straps would be tightened or rocks would be placed on their laps to make the spikes drive further into their bodies.
Ah.
There's another variation of this torture I found called the Chinese torture chair. And in this version, the victim would be strapped to a chair without spikes, but instead it had brass plates. And then they would be put over a fire to slowly burn to death.
Ooh.
There are records of this device, both versions, having actually existed. Okay, so we've just covered a lot of things out of the time frame of the medieval ages and Middle Ages. So let's move over to a few different ones and compare the difference in the level of humanity that started to show itself over time that got us kind of to where we are today.
Okay.
Let's talk about the blood eagle.
All right.
This is where the convicted would have their back slashed open so deep that the ribs were exposed. Then the ribs would be broken and twisted in a way that looked like wings coming out of the victim's back.
Yeah.
They would then add salt into the wound, literally would pour salt into the wound, for an extra dose of pain and torture before serving the final blow of ripping the lungs out, which they would then lay over the ribs to complete the winged effect.
Oh, wow.
This was said to be a form of Viking execution, but it's also often been the subject of debate. Some believe it truly happened, and others believe it may be just a tale of Nordic legends. So, what do you think?
I don't know. I've heard of that. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've seen it in a movie too, but yeah, that's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Next, we're going to talk about drawing and quartering.
Okay.
This gruesome form of punishment is said to have come out of England around the 13th century. In this one, The convicted or accused would be tied to a horse and dragged to the gallows. What would happen is once they arrived at the gallows, usually varied. Sometimes they would be hung or simply beheaded, and other times they would be disemboweled. But if they were guilty of something such as treason, your punishment was much worse. They would tie each arm and leg to a different horse, and then the horses would be made to run off in different directions, ripping the limbs from the person's body. From what I read, the ability to do this wasn't officially abolished until 1867.
Wow.
So next we're gonna talk about scaphism.
Scaphism.
Said to be used by the Persians. The convicted would be trapped between two boats. Which I read one source that said they were put into a hollowed out tree trunk.
Okay.
But this is where the convicted would be force-fed milk and honey, causing the person to have excessive diarrhea.
Okay.
Once the diarrhea began, the person was then smothered in milk and honey and usually left in the sun or still water. They would eventually begin to rot, which would draw the bugs in, and so would the sweetness from the honey and the sourness of the milk. And eventually, said person would die slowly, either from their bug bites and stings, or exposure to the sun, or dehydration, or infection.
Ew.
This was said to be true.
I think these are getting worse. God.
Next, we're going to talk about boiling. This form of execution was once extremely common in areas such as England and East Asia.
Okay.
This form of torture is exactly what it sounds like. The convicted would be stripped naked and put into a large pot of boiling liquid. The liquid would range from tar to oil to water. This is also a true method. This did happen. Next, we're going to talk about Ling Chi, also referred to death by 1,000 cuts.
I've heard of this one.
This form of torturous execution comes out of China. The convicted would be tied to a tree, and for days, little pieces of their skin, and occasionally their limbs, would be cut off. When it was believed that they had suffered enough or could suffer no more, the convicted would receive a finishing blow to the heart, or they would be decapitated. This was said to be in practice all the way up until 1905, when it was officially banned.
Wow.
Next, we are going to talk about being crushed by an elephant.
Oh my gosh.
This punishment method comes out of Asia, or more specifically, South and Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Again, this method is exactly what it sounds like. The convicted would be trampled to death by elephants who were said to be trained to make the trampling as painful and horrible as possible. Not really sure what methods of training were used to ensure the risen intensity of the trampling, but that's what it said.
You figure they wouldn't need the training. They just go...
Well, maybe... Okay, so what I was thinking was maybe they trained them to stomp on specific parts of the body first. Like maybe they would stomp on their legs, or they would stomp on an arm.
Okay, I mean, they're extremely smart.
Instead of one swell stomp to end it all, they would step on parts of the bodies that wouldn't necessarily kill somebody immediately.
Okay.
I don't know. Sense. That's the only thing that came to my mind. Okay. The punishment of the sack. Also.
Sorry.
Also,
he said the whole video was content warnings.
Also called Poena Culae, I think. This
right.
comes out of ancient Rome. If someone was accused of killing a family member, they would be sewn to a sack alongside some different type of animal, often a snake or a monkey, sometimes a dog. Then they would be tossed into a body of water left to drown or be killed by whatever animal they were attached to.
Wait, so they would sew the person to... Did they sew the sack to the animal too?
No. They would sew the person to the leather sack, and then they would throw the animal into the leather sack with the person, and then they would throw them both into the body of water.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So.
That's terrible. I mean, it's terrible for the person too, but...
You're sad about the monkey and the snake, aren't you?
They didn't do anything. They didn't do...
Okay. Next, we are going to talk about strappado or strapado. This is bringing it back to the medieval times during the Inquisition. The convicted would be strung up by their wrists, which were then tied behind their heads. Eventually, the weight would cause their shoulders to dislocate, and if it didn't, then weights would be added until it did. Okay. Yet again, this wasn't intended to kill the victim, but rather to cause a tremendous amount of agonizing pain, which one can only imagine how much pain that truly did cause. I can't even begin to think of how much this would hurt. And the last one we're going to talk about, and is actually the one that's said to still be used and practiced to this day, comes out of Iran. And it's known as the white torture.
The white?
The white torture.
The white torture, okay.
Yep. This type of torture is quite a bit different from the rest in that this one is strictly psychological.
Okay.
This is said to be damaging in some cases beyond mental repair. So in this form of torture, a person is put in a cell or a room where everything is white. The walls are white. The floors are white. Their clothes are white. The food they're served is white. Everything is entirely white. The guards wear only white. The lights are left on 24/7, and no one is allowed to speak a single word to the person. Ever.
Wow.
So this is most often known to be used in Iranian prisons. The result of this punishment are said to vary person to person, but some of the results that are noted are severe sleep deprivation, total memory loss, dizziness, headaches, eating disorders, phobias, development of extreme fears, depression, extreme paranoia, and horrific nightmares.
I can see that, all of that.
Yeah, this one is... I mean, don't get me wrong, they're all horrible and they're all terrifying in their own rights, but this one to me is really terrifying because A, it's still practiced to this day.
Yeah.
And B, I know that when you are, or a person is neglected of the ability to see color, when they've been able to see color previously, or they're put in a position where all they can see is the white, it does eventually start to really take away your memory capabilities.
Huh.
Like you start to forget people's faces.
Really?
Yeah. But anyway, this was my episode of historical torture, punishment, and cruelty that definitely illustrates just how awful the human race can be and how morbid the human mind can be in order to even think of some of these.
Yeah, there was some of the... I mean, all of them were terrible, but there was a few of them that hurt me.
Yeah. Yep.
Ugh.
And again, just to reiterate what I said earlier, I was not calling Europe population sick bastards. I was referring specifically to the people who participated in the activities of any of the tortures that took place at this time.
Right.
Just to clarify that. I love Europe. But
it's awesome.
If I missed some that you know about that you wish I had put in the episode, or if there's something you feel like I missed, please feel free to message or comment. And other than that, or if you were offended by anything I said, I apologize now, but feel free to message or comment. I'm known to struggle with the filter, so I apologize for that. But I did give a content warning.
Yes, you did. So, but like I said, I don't think anybody would be offended because, like you said, you were talking about people that were like way back in the day. That
yeah. None of them are still alive now.
In this horrible stuff, and bad on them.
Yeah, shame.
But not you, because we love y'all.
Yeah, not you guys. We love you guys. Y'all are awesome. We've advanced so much as a race since these times. You know, it almost makes, again, I'm gonna boldly say this, but it almost makes things like the electric chair or lethal injection seem pretty damn humane compared
definitely
to
the lethal
what
injection.
we used to do as a race. Because I'm not excluding that to one specific area. These things were practiced worldwide, everywhere, all over. So the whole world at one point in time was full of
sick bastards.
Sick bastards, yeah. At one point in time. But anyway, that was my episode.
That was really good. Like I said, a lot of that hurt me.
Yeah.
It still hurts me.
Well, as always, we can be found on pretty much any social media site. We are now going to be posting YouTube videos for every episode we do, come hell or high water. Whether we're in our pajamas, our hair's not done, sorry. We're sick, whatever the case may be. We're going to sniffle right on through and post a video every time. We also now have our website up and running. Yay, website! Which we will be putting merch on soon. We're working on that for anybody that might want to sport some Render the Darkness gear.
Yeah.
We certainly will be. Yeah, that's about all I can think of. So thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you very much.
And we are
Render the Darkness. Bye.